There are 3 mistakes that new investors make time and time again. For the lucky ones, these mistakes might set them back a few years, but for others, they might be set back by decades. But in this video, I'm going to save you a lot of time, stress, and money and stop you falling into the same traps. Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is James. I'm a financial planner, and this is a place where you can learn to make smarter financial decisions. So let's dive straight into our first mistake: investing in individual companies. Making your first investment in the stock market is a pretty big deal. You've probably been thinking about this for a couple of months, or perhaps even years, preparing yourself to take that first step into the world of formidable investors such as Warren Buffett and Benjamin Graham. Men who've made billions from their skill in trawling through financial accounts and investing in good companies at good prices. And just like any amateur in any field, you're going to look up to the best of the best to try and learn from them and emulate their success. And as a result, most new investors start about investing in individual businesses, building a portfolio of 10 to 15 good businesses that they think they've bought at good prices and that they think they want to hold for the long term. This is how the pros invest, so it's only natural that you would want to follow in their footsteps. But this often ends in disaster. When you choose to build a portfolio of individual companies, you are betting on your ability to pick a selection of companies that will outperform the wider market. Otherwise, you would just invest in an index fund that will, with no effort at all, provide you with the average market return. And as a novice coming into this, you might assume that 50% of companies outperform the market and 50% are likely to underperform. So all you need to do is to pick slightly more winners than losers, and hey presto, you've beaten the market. But this is another classic case of why a little bit of knowledge can be such a dangerous thing. Although the stock market as a whole has produced phenomenal returns, most stocks are actually terrible investments. In 2017, Hendrik Bessembinder released an academic paper that showed just how bad most stocks are. The paper was aptly called "Do Stocks Outperform Treasury Bills?" And in it, he looked back at the performance of every single publicly listed US company that has traded since 1926. And he found that the best performing 4% of companies could explain the net gain for the entire US stock market since 1926. So the 4% of companies were responsible for all of the gains in that period, whilst the other 96% of companies produced a return that was on average comparable with keeping your money in a savings account. So herein lies the risk. If you're trying to pick 10 good companies to invest in, you may get lucky and 1 or 2 of these might fall into that top 4%, and you may end up with market-beating returns. But if none of your stocks end up being winners, well, you get the idea. When you're only investing in a handful of stocks, the variability of your results can be enormous, and being over-concentrated is one of the biggest reasons for poor performance. Diversification is the answer to this, but the problem is that most professional investors, like Warren Buffett, people that new investors look up to, only ever hold a small number of holdings in their portfolio. They make concentrated bets. And Buffett even went so far to say, diversification is a protection against ignorance. It makes very little sense for those that know what they're doing. And I agree with him. But the question is, do you know what you're doing? Imagine if Warren Buffett was sat there in the room with you right now, and he asked you to pull up your portfolio and explain to him the rationale behind each of your holdings. Why did you buy it? Why are you still holding it? And when would you sell it? Do you think he's going to come away from that conversation saying, yeah, fair enough, this guy knows what he's doing? Or do you think he's going to say, you should probably stick your money in the S&P 500, which is what he recommends for everybody else? In all other domains, whether that's football, golf, or physics, if you want to be the best, you need to learn from the best. You need to act like the best. So it's no surprise that new investors start out trying to pick individual stocks like the pros. But this is so hard to do. And unless you've got the time and resources to commit to this, you'd be much better off embracing your ignorance and sticking your money in an index fund. Which brings us nicely onto mistake number 2, chasing performance. Now you may be sitting there thinking, James, come on, I'm intelligent enough to know that I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to investing. But there are professional fund managers out there that do know what they're doing. And why don't I just invest my money with them and let them beat the market for me? Well, yes, I would agree with you. There are some fund managers out there that are exceptional and have had exceptional performance, but they're harder to find than you might think. Here we're looking at the results of a study conducted by Dimensional Fund Advisors that reviewed the performance of almost 3,000 actively managed US funds over the last 20 years. In this, they were looking to see how many of these professional fund managers were actually able to outperform their benchmark. So how many of them were actually able to beat an index fund? And as you can see, only 22% were able to achieve their goal. Behind each of these funds is a team of analysts that have committed enormous amounts of resources to this endeavor. They've been educated in the best schools, they've earned CFAs, PhDs, and have dedicated their lives to investing. And yet, most fall short. Yes, fees play a big part in this, of course, but you should not dismiss the fact that this is the most competitive sport in the world. It's hard, so hard that most funds end up shutting up shop due to poor performance, with 59% of funds closing down during this period. And this creates another problem. When new investors are trying to find funds to invest in, the only thing that they really consider is past performance. And when they log into Hargreaves Lansdown or AJ Bell or wherever they invest, they'll often find a curated list of funds that have had long track records of incredible performance. Just what they're looking for. But herein lies the problem. You're only looking at the survivors. With stock pickers, it's almost impossible to tell whether their success has come from skill or from luck. I like to compare it to Darren Brown's absolutely fascinating TV show in 2011 called The System, where he manages to convince a woman to bet her and her family's entire life savings on a horse race.
6 weeks ago, I took a woman, a random member of the public, and I told her which horse was going to win in a certain race. It did win, she was intrigued, I then did it again and again and again. She started to bet larger and larger amounts of money. Now today, that woman has scraped together every last penny that she can find, and she is risking it all on one final race.
But just before the race is about to start, Darren reveals that he's actually been doing the same thing with over 1,000 other people, supplying each of them with different tips, and if their horses lose, then they're excluded from the experiment. But if they win, then they get to the next stage, and the last standing person was this unfortunate lady. We thought Darren had some supernatural ability, and it turned out that it was just random luck. This is known as survivorship bias. And that is exactly what is going on with these 3,000 funds. It's possible that after 20 years, maybe 5 or 10% of them will still be outperforming the market just by random luck, which means that almost half of these successful funds that you're looking at on these curated lists could fall into this category. And if that is the case, then it's likely that their luck will shortly run out. Now, don't get me wrong, I do believe that there are insanely talented teams out there that can systematically beat the market, but it's so hard to do, and even harder to find these people so that you can invest with them. And here's some evidence of that. This study takes the top 25% of US active fund managers between 2010 and 2015 and looks at how many of them then went on to be in the top 25% over the following 5 years. And as you can see, it's only 21%. You also need to be especially careful about fund managers that are wedded to specific investing styles or sectors, because again, down to random luck, each of these styles and sectors will have their time in the sun and they will have great performance at some point. But unless that manager is then able to change their style and sector, and many of them can't, then it's likely that they'll go on to underperform. And it's then your job to work out when that might be and move out of that fund. The classic example of this is Neil Woodford, who did exceptionally well when his investment style was in favor, but eventually it all fell apart. Nowadays, we have darlings like Bailey Gifford's Scottish Mortgage or Cathie Wood's ARK Innovation ETF that have done exceptionally well while their sector and style have been booming. However, recently the tide has turned on these investment styles, and who knows when they will come back into favor. Now, the third mistake that I see new investors making is trying to time the market. And I often get this from new clients of mine. James, I'm feeling nervous about the markets right now. We've got Ukraine, we've got Russia, we've got inflation. Can we just sell out a little bit now and then just get back in when the market falls? To which I say, I have no idea what the markets are going to do over the next 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years. No one does. Putin and Biden could kiss and make up and suddenly the markets could go through the roof. Or the US and Russia could go to war and the market could fall off a cliff. Or the market could anticipate the fact that there'll be a huge amount of up and coming wartime government stimulus and the market could still go through the roof. Who knows what is going to happen? And if you want to try and engage in this type of behavior, then you may as well be sitting at the roulette wheel because this is very dangerous. Over the last 30 years, the S&P 500 has produced phenomenal returns, 10.23% on an annualized basis. But if you had tried to time the market and you'd come out for a couple of days and you happen to have just missed the single best performing day in the last 30 years, your return would have dropped to 9.84%. And if you'd happened to miss the 5 best single days, that then drops to 8.6%. And the best 15 days, and finally, the best 25 days. If you had missed the single 25 best trading days over the last 30 years, your performance would have been little better than sticking your money in a savings account. Now, of course, the counter argument to this is, what if I had happened to miss the worst days over the last 30 years? And the answer is that yes, your performance would have been incredible. But the problem is that the worst days are often directly preceded by the best days. And unless you time this stuff perfectly, you are going to mess it up. Guys, as you know, I am a massive fan of passive investing, just sticking your money in an index fund and letting it ride. That's not saying that I don't believe that there are exceptionally talented people out there that can beat the markets, and all credit to you if you want to try and be one of them and you're ready to commit the resources required to do so. But personally, I do not see any point in committing years of my life and emotional stress to an activity where I have such little control over the outcome. And the chances are that I'm not going to be able to add any value at all. I would much rather spend my time and mental energy on activities where I can control the outcome. I know I'm pretty good at making content. I'm also very good at helping people build financial plans that can achieve their goals and saving them a lot of money in tax. And I know that I'm going to make a lot more money and cause myself a lot less stress by focusing on these things where I know I can add value, and by leaving my investments to run on autopilot. And I would suggest that you think about doing the same thing too. But saying that, I will always be a better investor than you. And you're going to have to watch this video here to find out why. I'll see you there.